All right, but man, today is Thursday. It is May 23rd. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. Before we really get off and running here, I want to talk to you guys about the delicious restaurant known as Portillo's.
Beef week, baby.
Beef week. Italian beef is so delicious because Portillo's has it slow roasted in-house for 4 hours, and it's served on fresh baked bread with their signature gravy and peppers, and they got big things they want to hook you up with if you enter these sweepstakes. So
Let's hear it.
listen up closely. Portillo's is celebrating National Italian Beef Week, obviously, and they're with two iconic partners. Obviously, Portillo's is one, and for this three-peat, they've teamed up with Lou Malnati's to bring back the collab Italian beef deep dish pizza for a limited time. You can get this Italian beef pizza with sweet peppers or hot giardiniera at tastesofchicago.com. Plus, you can win 2 tickets to Lollapalooza, airfare, awesome swag, and Portillo's gift cards in the Italian Beef Week giveaway from Coca-Cola and Portillo's. Just snap a picture or video with a Portillo's Italian beef sandwich, then head to Instagram, X, or TikTok using hashtag BeefWeek2024 and tag at Portillo's Hot Dogs. It's that easy, and it's really a no-brainer.
I will be doing it.
I don't know how much a Lala ticket is, but it's definitely not cheap.
Yeah, this is a big-time prize.
Yeah, compare that with airfare and everything else. It's a good deal. So celebrate Italian Beef Week the Chicago way with Portillo's. Order at Portillo's.com or visit your local Portillo's today.
Portillo's is going manifest destiny here. They're going sea to shining sea with those beefs, sausages, everything. So you're going to get on it.
That's what we're doing.
Yep.
And on that note, welcome to the show. Chief and I, as you heard us, we are joined by a former, I would say, frequent guest. It is Jeff Nadu coming at us from Pennsylvania, the beautiful Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
I mean, the new setup looks great, but I used to love when you just had the Biggie Smalls poster in the background of your old spot. It was just, yeah.
I gave them away to 2 listeners of my show that wanted them, so I don't have them anymore. But
Damn.
I want a little bit more mob-centric in here, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
How's everything, guys? You all right?
We're good, man. It's good to see that face again. It's been too long.
Yeah, I used to love doing the dog walks. I like speaking to you guys about this kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
this is one of the only shows that does it at Barstool. So.
I love doing the sit down too. We talk a little mafia, a little JFK. It was always a good time.
Now that we're friends again, maybe someone asked about you recently. They're like, "Are you ever going to get Chief back on?" I was like, "Yeah, I got it now. We might have to."
I would love to.
There you go. It's a ceasefire. It's a ceasefire right now between Nadu and the outfit, as some would say. So yeah, you're right though. The no Biggie and was it Jordan? Was that the other picture?
Biggie and Jordan, yeah, my two of my favorites.
Damn,
yeah.
we should have got the Jordan one for this office.
That would have been great.
Yeah, that's a good point. It would have been perfect. But yeah, I ended up somebody wanted them. I went to the thing and sold them, sent them to them, and they're in good homes, I guess now.
Good
Stuff. All right, Jeff, obviously when you come on, we've talked max prisons, we've talked cartel, and we're going to do that again today. We're talking more cartel. One of the things I'll tell you, like our YouTube channel on our shorts has like millions of views. So people definitely have an appetite to kind of know what's going on south of the border.
It was on Chapo's son, I think.
Was that the one? I know. We've done a couple. I know.
8 million views or something.
Our top 2, one is what the Sinaloa Cartel, 7.4 million views, and the arrest of El Chapo's son, 6.3 million views.
That's what it was. I seen it a week ago. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right, where do you want to start with this, Jeff?
Well, I think like a lot of people see cartels now as like these militarized, they're almost like, again, like military unit groups. And Los Zetas, we're going to talk about today, they were really the first of their kind. And the shock and awe, like violence that we see in Mexico, the executions on camera, that sort of thing, it wasn't always like that in Mexico. And Los Zetas really kind of revolutionized that. And they went from being kind of a bandit type group that sold drugs to a hyper militarized group with a bunch of military officers. And that's what we see today with most cartels are not, farmers with shotguns. They're groups with RPGs and militarized vehicles. And Los Zetas were the first group to really go into the 20th century and create that.
So is it just like, did they do this? It's just like, hey, like we're going to be a violent takeover type of group and we're just going to be heavily armored. And that was more so about their rival gangs than doing anything over the border?
Well, yeah, when So Los Zetas, when you talk about them, you have to start with the Gulf Cartel, which in the 80s, there was a guy that ran the Gulf Cartel, Juan Garcia Bregu, and he was a guy who really revolutionized selling cocaine. He made a deal with the Cali Cartel in Colombia to essentially cut out where you were paying per kilo for a load. And he was getting them essentially on a consignment, and he was getting a 50% split. So every kilo he received, he would just send back 50%. And it allowed him to kind of like stockpile all sort of product. And it innovated trafficking in Mexico. And he owned that border region at Texas, right? So like we see on the news a lot, the southern border with Texas. The Gulf Cartel has run that area since the 70s, and no other group has ever gotten in there. And Garcia Bregu, who was kind of the first real known leader of the Gulf Cartel, he kind of cornered that area and has owned it ever since. But eventually he gets arrested, and, you know, it wasn't really a rivalry like it is now. Every group kind of had their own area, whether it was the Guadalajara cartel, the Tijuana cartel, and they all kind of ran their areas, and they limited violence. It was just about selling drugs and getting the profit back. There wasn't as much violence as there is now. He then goes to jail, and the guy that takes over, this guy, Asiel Cardenas, in like the late 90s, he was kind of a real lunatic, and he was super paranoid with like other groups attempting to muscle in, because we have to understand there's an 800-mile border, I believe, with Texas and Mexico, and the Gulf Cartel has always run that. It's extremely lucrative when it comes to drugs. We're talking about billions of dollars. Like Garcia Bregu had like a $10 billion operation yearly. It's huge money. The border's always been huge money. So this guy Cardenas comes in, and it was really, he becomes paranoid. And this is where he kind of looks to beefing it up from just like guys with shotguns and stuff like that to, I need to go and find military people. And that's what he does.
How big is this group? So when you say like they're a military, are we talking like thousands of soldiers? Like, could they invade a?
Well, in their, like, which I'll get to, like in their like most popular heights, like in the 2000s and into 2010s, when they're taking on the Sinaloa cartel, which I'll talk about. I mean, there are thousands of people that work for this organization. But when it started, this guy, Asiel Cardenas, he eventually takes the Gulf Cartel over, because once Abregu goes to prison, there's a power vacuum. And him and his best friend are vying for taking over the Gulf Cartel, who he ends up killing, which he gets this nickname, Mata Amigo, which means essentially friend killer. So he kills his best friend. He was his godfather to his kids.
Tough reputation.
Say that again?
Tough nickname, tough reputation.
Right.
Yeah.
And he becomes like really paranoid. And this guy, he was a major drug user, just super paranoid. So he recognizes that I got to protect this really lucrative area. These groups are changing. They're becoming more and more crazy. So he goes to this guy, Arturo Guzman de Sena. This is a guy who worked for the GAFE unit in Mexico, which was this special forces group. They were kind of similar to, in a way, like a Blackwater type of group, the Wagner group. Think of like that.
Mercenaries.
They were used by the military to go and conduct high intensity operations and things like that. But they weren't making much money. So he goes to them and says, hey, get some of your people, come work for me. You be my bodyguards. You can act on certain missions for me. They agree because they're going to make way more money. So they leave the military, and he takes about 30 or so other friends of his in the military, and they go work for this high-level drug trafficker. And this is where the Zetas are created. Zeta obviously means letter. So Zeta was the radio code they would use. So Guzman de Sena, this military guy, he would identify as Z1, Z2, Z3, and he gets about 30 of his people, and they start working for this drug trafficker. And the Gulf Cartel now has this armed unit to, again, protect their boss and to protect the territory from not only other groups, but from the military too.
Yeah, and the Los Zetas, they're known as like some of the worst, right?
Yeah, but at the beginning, though, it wasn't like that. At the beginning, they were really just bodyguards. They were protecting their leader. Mm-hmm. Again, Matamoros, all those like border towns, really lucrative. So they're just kind of protecting it, running protection rackets. But like, remember at this point, they're still the most profitable group at this point in Mexico. So like some of the cartels today didn't exist. Like Cartel Jalisco, it didn't exist. You know, the Sinaloa Cartel was powerful, but they had their own territory and they kind of stayed away. This all didn't really jump off until 2002 when the Gulf Cartel recognized that they want the other border point sharing a border with Texas, Nuevo Laredo, which again borders Laredo and Texas. That was always run by this really local group, Los Chachos. They had run it for years. And the Gulf Cartel recognized, we want that. We want to go get that border point as well, because that kind of is the gateway to New Mexico and some of the other territories. So let's go take that. They order the Zetas to go and take it by force. They kill the leader, this guy El Chacho. They kill him and they take Nuevo Laredo, which if you look at today, 20 plus years later, they still run Laredo. Now, I'll get into the fact that the Zetas no longer around, but they've run Laredo since then. Some of the things with these battles happen. They take over Laredo. The chief head of the Zetas, the Z1 guy, this chief general from the war that becomes an employee essentially, he dies. And in 2003, the original Gulf Cartel leader, the main guy, Asiel Cardenas, he is arrested by the Mexican military and he's put in prison. Until like the mid-2000s, he still runs the group, but it's fractured. He eventually gets extradited. So the end of the road comes for him. Once you get extradited to the U.S., it's over for you. So we look at like recently, El Chapo could run the Sinaloa Cartel or parts of the Sinaloa Cartel from prison because the Mexican prison system is way different than the one here. Mm-hmm. But you see, once he was extradited, that's over because they're going to send him to ADX. He's not running shit. So once you get extradited, Cardenas goes to the United States. He's actually still in prison. And what's crazy about all this is Cardenas gets out of prison this year in 2024. I think it's in August. So he's been still in prison this whole time. And once all that happens, this is where all the infighting happens, where they become this really like brutal, depraved group. And what Eddie was talking about, in 2005, that's when these cartel execution tapes start because they run Laredo, the Zetas, and the Gulf Cartel. But the Sinaloa Cartel decides to muscle in. They decide, we want this because we see a fracture. The leader's in jail. He's been extradited. There's no leader of this group. Let's try to muscle into Laredo. Because the Sinaloa Cartel by this point had already had the Arizona border points, the New Mexico border points. They want Texas, and they want to start muscling into that. So they go in 2005 into Laredo. They send their big fighters at this point because they have their own splinter groups. They send them in, and a war happens between the Sinaloa Cartel and Los Zetas. And we see shootouts in the street. We see shock and awe violence. We see all sorts of crazy shit. But the Zetas always win because they have that military background. Remember, this is a group that when they started in the 80s and early 90s, they were trained by this country. They were trained by Israel. And they originally started, these military people. The unit was started as a way to protect for the World Cup, which was in Mexico at the time. So they were trained in all sorts of different warfare. Yeah. So they were super high level. And they were just, all these low level groups, they were just blowing away.
So that was in 86. So when did you reference, you said a couple of things there that gave me pause. You said the Los Zetas don't really exist anymore. Is that accurate? Okay. And do they not exist because they lost that war with the Sinaloa Cartel? Like, who came out on top of that war?
And that war in 2005, no. They continue to gain power. They win the war. They kind of extinguish the Sinaloa Cartel from Nuevo Laredo. And this is where the rise of Los Zetas happens. Because by the early 2010s, they're making more money than the Gulf Cartel was. This little faction of military people is now ballooned into this huge group. And they were originally enacted as like a protection group, but they're now making more money, have more territory. And what they start doing, the Zetas, is they use their deranged psychopathy and savagery to start creating extortion rackets. They start stealing oil. They start making way more money than the Gulf Cartel's making. So they kind of recognize and say, we can operate on our own. We don't need the Gulf Cartel.
Okay.
And this is what leads to the most bloody time period in this area between 2010 and 2015, where the Gulf Cartel say, fuck them. We're going to just go to war with them. So this group that was once started as a faction of the Gulf Cartel eventually starts fighting against the Zetas. And today, they still fight today. The Zetas are, which I'll also mention, they splinter into groups that are around today. So the Los Zetas group is not around, but they've just changed their name and are different groups now.
Hey, let's pause one more time here because I want to talk about ChevyDriveChicago.com. Summer road trip season is here. It's a holiday weekend, Chief. It's Memorial Day weekend. There you go.
Your car running right. Get it running right with Chevy Drive Chicago.
Yeah, like it's the perfect time to go grab a new Chevy. The SUV lineup is awesome, obviously, and the new Silverado truck has all the space you need to comfortably get to where you're going. ChevyDriveChicago.com has the latest offers on all vehicles and can help you find your local Chevy dealer. Every Chevy is the number one pick. ChevyDriveChicago.com is the official truck partner of the Chicago Bears.
Love that. Put all the boys in the truck. Vibes are high. Feeling good about the Bears. Feeling great about Chevy.
Yeah, getting around the city in style.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple.
The best.
And yeah, like I said, you're going to be taking those trips up to Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Indiana.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. Make sure you're all ready to go with a Chevy. Go to ChevyDriveChicago.com to learn more. Go do it. Chevy's the best. So where does the Sinaloas file in between that fight?
Yeah. So, I mean, the Sinaloa kind of retreated from Laredo, and they eventually kind of just took their – if you look at, like, the current map today, they obviously have a huge swath of territory, and they're now the most powerful cartel, and they've been the most powerful cartel for a while. But, again, since the 80s, that border, Texas border crossing has been run by the Gulf Cartel or offshoots of the Gulf Cartel. I think the craziest part of the whole Los Zetas story is, like I said, they're making more money by 2010. They create a civil war inside the group. And this war is engulfing Mexico, right? Northern Mexico is a war zone. Thousands of people are dying. Massacres are being perpetrated. And the eventual leader that takes over Los Zetas is a person called Heriberto Lascano. Lascano was Z3. He was one of the original military people that that started the Zetas group. And this guy was deranged. Like, perpetrated and killed hundreds of people, ordered massacres. Like, this is a guy who was a cannibal. He would, when they would kidnap people, he would feed them for a while, treat them well. He would then get them really drunk or on some sort of sedatives. They'd whack the person. They would then use his buttocks as, and I'm not even kidding, this is true, for tamales. They would cut it out and they would put it into like tamales and eat it. He would feed people to animals. He had lions and tigers. He liked zoo animals. He would feed people to them. This guy was incredibly depraved. And this is where, again, the movies start, the execution tapes. The more violent, the better.
How long was that guy, the deranged guy, in power?
He was in power for about 3 or 4 years. And again, as we learn with the mafia or any of these organized crime groups, there are always people in the wings that are attempting to take power away. And what happens is Lascano begins to get weaker and weaker. And there's another guy, this guy, Miguel Trevino Morales, who I've covered organized crime and looked into it for like a decade now. This guy is the most sadistic, savage I've ever looked into. This guy, and I'll explain some of his tactics in a second, but he's a guy from Laredo. He came up in Laredo. He is the second in command in Los Zetas to Lascano. Now, the difference between him and Lascano is Lascano has a military background. He doesn't. He's like a street thief. He's kind of banging it out in the streets as a gangster. And he recognizes that as a kind of a national, chief of Los Zetas, I can take this group over now because he is becoming weaker and weaker. And I can kind of get the troops to kind of come with me. And he was a notorious figure in northeastern Mexico. He had become this cult figure because he was in like 5 to 10 gun battles and he would always survive. He was just unafraid of dying. Like he would go out and just try to get swaths of territory. And if you didn't hand things over, it got really bad for you. This guy perpetrated massacres of, like in 2010, he killed like 90 people at one time. Another one where he killed almost 200. If you didn't get down with him, and he was just taking swaths of territory, and he recognizes, I have my own group here. I don't need Lascano. Lascano by the 2011, 2012 area becomes really weak. Lascano is eventually killed by the military. So now, again, power vacuum in Los Zetas, Miguel Trevino takes over. And as I said, like, this guy was really deranged. He would say that at times, like, he couldn't sleep at night if he didn't kill someone that day. Like, he was a really deranged guy, and he would like get people in a car and they would just drive around and they just shoot people at random. Like, he was just really civilians. Sick. Yeah, he was just a sick guy. He had this torture method.
Was that for sport, or was that like, hey, like, we're just gonna? It's an intimidation tactic.
That's exactly what it was. And these guys operate in fear. And that's one of the reasons they make these execution videos. They're made as a way to teach people in these areas, we run this shit, not the government, not anything. But then they also do things like they'll give poor people money and they'll give kids toys at Christmas. And they try to embody that they're good people, just don't cross us.
Yeah.
And as I've said to you guys before, like, the reason these cartels will never be defeated by this government or any government is because they have won the people over more than the government. The government has screwed them for decades. They don't build roads. They don't give them, running resources or anything. So these cartels, who are the people of these areas, they come in and say, you know what? They're not going to do anything for you, but we will. Again, though, just don't cross us. And he had this thought of, I want to scare people to the nth degree. And he had to lay down the law, he felt. He also had a torture method that was just unseen before, where he would get a barrel, like an oil barrel, and he would put a bunch of acid in it and kind of get it to like a bubbling temperature, like a soup. And he would throw you in there and you would slowly burn to death in this hot soup, they called it. In Spanish, a stew is guiso, el guiso, they called it. Guiso is like a stew, and he would slowly kind of cook you in this stew. It was kind of a weird method. One other thing, he also believed in cannibalistic methods, where if he would kidnap a leader of a rival group, he would cut their hearts out of their chest and eat the hearts, because he believed, and he would talk about this, he believed that by eating their hearts, he had this kind of passage over them. Like, he held over them, and he was more immortal than them. And they were in him now. They were a piece of him, and he owned them. He was a real weird character, but he was very, very, I mean, he if I had to estimate, he probably killed several thousand people, probably.
All right. So you said that the Mexican government, and I assume you meant our government, will never defeat them.
No.
It feels like we don't really try. What if we just were like, hey, we come to an agreement with the the Mexican government, and it's like, we're just going to start drone striking these people.
Well, the thing is, though, like, what we have to realize is most of these groups, they make too much money, right? And they pretty much control everyone up to the president, right? So, like, if you go into any state of Mexico right now, most of the police chiefs, the mayors, state governors, state government, they're controlled by crime groups, right? From states, small states to the big states. And it really, because then you'd also have to attack a neighbor. Mexico is an ally of this country, whether the people and the people that control these people are, the government is. And there's no way Mexico will ever agree, because they're all in bed with these groups. And as I've said before,
well, then they're not an ally.
Right. Per se, they're not.
Well, yeah. And then I would say, this is a thing that sticks in my craw, so to speak, where it's like, you can make an argument that these cartels, through their importing of fentanyl, kills more Americans than any foreign power, any Middle Eastern terror group.
Purely a national security problem. You're 100% right.
Totally. So why are we too afraid to treat them as such? Because
this makes billions of dollars, bro. It's the same reason we don't do anything about border because the border is big business. Okay, every person that crosses the border illegally pays between $5,000 and $20,000 depending where they're coming from, and that is run. Criminal groups run that. You get wristbands when you go through the border. You have a wristband. If you don't have a wristband, you're probably going to be whacked. You have to pay. Everybody pays. Babies, toddlers, young adults, women, children. Everybody pays. And these crime groups now don't just sell drugs. They push people through the border. They own the oil industry. They make big money, and it all flows up here. As I've said before, like the criminal element in our country, 90% of it is because of the drug trade.
Right.
The drug trade controls crime, and it then in turn controls police on the street. Cities like Chicago, most of the crime are drug related. That's big business for these countries. So I think it all goes back to money. And these cartel groups are funding a lot of things. Yeah, they're bad. But you have to also remember, a lot of these people that run these groups, like the true leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, it's widely been believed for the last 30 years, he is an asset of this government. He's allowed to freely operate, and he's got carte blanche to do whatever he wants. So this government's corrupt as well, and they're involved in it too. So let's not forget that.
Could you imagine if America did decide to do something, and like you said, you go, whatever, drone strike, however it's done, and you are some of the Americans that are in Mexico at that time?
That's another thing.
You
have to worry about.
Yeah,
you have to worry about your own people. Here's the thing.
Holy fuck!
The only way this would ever happen is if DT gets in. He would be the only person crazy enough to do it.
Well, I mean, he started to try to do it, right? He started, there was projects to build the wall, and then it was like anything Trump said was bad. Didn't matter. He could say the sky was blue and be like, "Nah, it looks kind of green today." Okay, that felt like that, at least from where I'm sitting on a lot of issues. The border being chief among them, and then now it got so bad the last several years that they're like, "Man, maybe we should actually do some of these things that Trump was advocating for." The Biden administration started to kind of maybe side more towards what Donald Trump was talking about. So is that just all public relations? Is that really all that is? Like, on our side?
I think you make an interesting point because, look, I think the worst thing that can happen to a municipality in Mexico is when a major cartel leader gets arrested. Because what's going to happen is, like any criminal group, arresting them is only, plugging a leak for about 5 minutes, because the next person is going to come right in. And what happens is when you extinguish a lot of leaders, the retaking of territory can become very violent. Because let's say El Chapo's arrested. I don't know if you guys, and you guys may not know this, but the Sinaloa Cartel is more powerful than it ever has become. And what's happened is, by people being arrested, so like his son and guys like that, there's now civil wars inside the Sinaloa Cartel. The Sinaloa Cartel is like 3 civil wars right now going on inside of it for control of stuff. I mean, so you can arrest all you want, but you never actually address the major problem. And let's just say the government in this country does go in and do this. Are you going to get rid of every single person? And what are you going to do with the relationships you've cultivated? El Mayo Zambada, the true leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, is an asset of this country. It's that simple.
Why do you say that? What evidence is there for that?
Because he has been allowed to operate, and I'll give you a little piece of advice on this. He's been allowed to operate for 40 plus years. There is no one in the history of Mexico that has sold narcotics at the level that he has that has not been either apprehended or killed by this government or that government or put in prison. There's also a lot of proof because when you look into his wife's brother worked for the CIA in Cuba in the 60s. He then moved to California and began trafficking marijuana into Mexico. She meets this guy, Ishmael Zambada, and all of a sudden, ever since then, never been arrested. In fact, you look into the Chapo trial, his own son cooperated against El Chapo. And that's one of the reasons that faction now hates the Chapitos, the sons. And that's one of the civil wars we're talking about here. He's protected. He's extremely layered. I mean, there's probably 8 or 10 levels of security to even get near him. He has him. It's actually unclear if he's even still alive. He's pretty old at this point. He's like in his 80s. But I think the thought of like Donald Trump saying, "Oh, we're going to just go in and find these people." Good luck. I mean, it's not particularly easy. I mean, guys like El Mayo and these guys, they're huge. And you look at like Los Zetas. In 2015, this guy Miguel Trevino was arrested. He's in prison. But what happens is someone comes right in. In fact, his brother took over. And eventually Los Zetas' name goes away, but it just splinters into new groups, right? So like there's a group now, Cartel del Noreste, the Northeast Cartel. That's like a faction and splinter group of Los Zetas. And they still run the same area. No one's ever come in and taken it. And they're still fighting with other groups. But it's fighting causes deaths and people die. Yeah. And it's not military
and it's expensive too.
Very.
Okay. So is creating these perpetually creating these vacuums and therefore creating civil wars, is that sort of the best that we can hope for, where it's like, hey, like, and has that ever impacted the flow of volume of drugs or money to the cartels? Has that really, I guess, more so the volume? Are they still?
No, because it's only creating more and more groups. Because what's so interesting about the word cartel is people use it as like this mythical group, and it's all just one group. They're the cartel. There are dozens of cartels in Mexico. Okay, there's the ones we know, the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel. There's like really small little groups that are extremely powerful in their particular areas. So I think the amount of drugs that this country wants, the amount of drugs that the world wants, it's such a globally huge amount that everyone could come in and profit. And as I said, it's not just drugs that these groups are pushing. These groups control the southern border. It's that simple. Okay. It's not like the military is there conducting these things. Again, the wristbands you're getting, that money is going into the coffers of the Gulf Cartel or whoever. So there's a lot of money for everybody. There's cartels that strictly work in stealing fuel from the government, like Pemex, which is your, high level, gas producer there. They'll just go in and go into certain areas, get the people that run these, that are like the chief people that work for Pemex or whatever. They'll get them under their control and they'll just steal fuel. And that's what they do. They're fuel thieves.
I remember hearing a term from the 80s and 90s describing Colombia and maybe a couple others, but specifically Colombia. They call them a narco state. They're a narco state.
Oh, yeah.
But it does sound, but that made it seem as if, at least in my head, that was more organized and more, it was like there's a narco state and Pablo Escobar is at the top of it. What you're describing sounds more just like, hey, this is fucking chaos. Like, it's not a state.
A lot of these groups are rudderless, right? So, like, it's not like your traditional mafia where there's like their boss, underboss, consigliere, and then captains and soldiers. As you alluded to, look, back in the day, so in like the 80s, the Gulf Cartel had one supreme leader and everybody underneath. But and this is something we saw in Narcos, the show. At one point, the Guadalajara cartel says, okay, everyone's going to have their own region, right? So this guy has this region, this guy has that region. And at that point, there was control as well. Now it's just, as you said, rudderless factions just fighting against each other. And there's one kind of leader in one group, one kind of leader in another. Like the Sinaloa cartel has multiple people leading factions, right? Zambada, he runs his faction. The Chapitos, but one Chapito is like the Chapito they arrested, the kid you guys talked about, Chapo's kid. He's the weakest of the four brothers. In fact, Chapo at one point said he was not cut out for that life. Like he put him in like private school and said like, you're not, that's why they called him El Raton, the mouse, because he was kind of like,
he's the Fredo.
Yeah, kind of. And he was like, he wasn't as crazy as his brother. Like Ivan is the crazy brother. He's the one that's like, boom, 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 boom. But there are just so many leaders of factions, and like right now they're fighting against their uncle. their uncle has a faction and they're fighting against him and they're fighting against this. And they're also fighting against the U.S. government because the U.S. government recently dropped indictments saying you are the poster boys of fentanyl, even though they're not. Okay. I mean, fentanyl was a man-made thing, just like meth. Okay. Fentanyl is produced and created. My whole thing is, and I never understood this with fentanyl, when you sell cocaine, okay, it's a very simple process. You go to Colombia, you get it at bulk, and you flip it and sell it. You know, you cut it down a little bit, but that's really it. There's no upkeep. It's the easiest drug to push and sell. Marijuana, you got to cultivate. Meth, you got to cultivate. You got to do all this stuff. There's a lot that goes into it. Cocaine was easy. I just didn't understand why a lot of these groups just didn't stick with that. Like Pablo Escobar sold cocaine. He wasn't selling heroin and all this stuff. Cocaine's easy. You get it, boom, boom, sell it.
How much?
And it's not going to kill anybody. Fentanyl kills people. Right. That's what I don't understand.
How much of legalization on a state-by-state basis here has pushed the cartels to go into fentanyl and other drugs?
Well, you know, it's funny. It doesn't, as I've said, like these groups, they just kind of adapt. Like if you look into Chapo's sons, they are very involved with legal marijuana production. Like there's, I've talked to journalists in Mexico that have covered this. They have product lines, merch. Like they sell merch just like any company. You know, they've gotten in and adapted to what business they're in. And it's not, they're in a lot of illegal rackets, but think of it like the Outfit, right? In Chicago. Yeah. For years, the Outfit were bootleggers. They then took the money. And yeah, there was a lot of illegal rackets, but they were also getting into legit business. So what the mafia did in New York. For years, it was extortion and lottery and stuff like that. But then they started taking that money and saying, let's get into construction. Let's get into unions. And that's what the Sinaloa Cartel did. They just adapted. And all these groups adapt. Their legalization will make them money because they'll just start, okay, well, we'll insulate ourselves and we'll oversee the legal marijuana trade.
Yeah, isn't it always said that the cartel is big in the avocado game down there too?
That's something I was going to get into too. I actually, anytime I go out and someone hands me a lime, I think about where this lime came from. And that's another really sad kind of problem that the drug wars created. Cartel Jalisco has a group called, you know, in a translation, the Lime Squad. That's what they're called. They have a logo and everything. It's a lime and like a fighter. It's crazy. And their specific job is to go into farms in Jalisco and other states and pressure and extort lime and avocado farmers to either give up their farm or die. And yeah, that's another trade they're getting into, lime and avocados. I mean, you have to realize like the avocado business is billions of dollars. Think of that. Yeah. You know, avocados from Mexico, that slogan. I mean, that's a really cultivated trade down there. It's like, you know, grapes or any fruit. It's huge. And they've recognized that. And there are special forces that are going into these farms and these farms are huge. I mean, they're thousands of acres and they go in and say, look, you either give it up or we'll kill you. And there are some farmers that fight back. And what a really interesting group to look into in Mexico is groups called narco defense groups, where they're like vigilante groups, right? So like there's the little towns that are like militias that band together like farmers and they fight back against these cartels. But what's so insane is a lot of them end up becoming cartel groups because they realize, well, we need more money because we got to continue to fight this war. And the only way to make money is to
be in the
sell drugs too.
Can't beat them, join them. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, 100%. And there are so many conflicts going on in Mexico. You know, places that like one big state right now that's dealing with a lot of conflict is Chiapas, which is the most southern state. It borders Guatemala. And that is a huge state because at one point Chiapas had no cartel activity. It was really like scenic and beautiful. It was a lot of indigenous Mexicans. Ago? This was probably 5 to 7 years ago.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is going on now. This has been going on over the last 3-4 years. The Sinaloa Cartel, CJNG, and then local groups are fighting over Chiapas because Chiapas is huge because not only is it a route for narcotics, but remember most migrants are going through either Chiapas, or the neighboring states, right? Mm-hmm. So they got to walk through Chiapas to get to the end game. So it's a huge state, and what we're seeing is a lot of conflicts going on. So a lot of the videos coming out are from Chiapas and Tabasco. Tabasco borders that area as well. There's a lot of groups that want Tabasco as well because that's a really fertile area. So a lot of the videos that I'm seeing on a regular basis are coming out of 2 or 3 states. And then you have the other conflicts. But I just don't think people realize how incredibly huge this is. It's not just 1 or 2 groups and that's it. And all these groups were once just pushing cocaine or another drug or two. But yeah it's insane how big the scope of it is. Yeah. And I only really talked about some of it,
Well, you were talking about these militia groups, these different towns. This is probably maybe even 10 years ago now, but Netflix did a great little mini-series documentary on one guy in particular. And he was like an older guy, kind of looked like, like a Mexican farmer, cowboy kind of looked to him. And you just were like, man, this guy is fucking awesome. Like, this guy is the man. And you're following him. They're showing these battles and, this and that. And then you get to the end, and he's like giving kind of like this impassioned speech. I can't think of the name of it right now.
Yeah, it was auto defenses he ran, right?
Maybe. But then like the last slide of the documentary was like, yeah, he died. He got killed.
Yeah, it was just called it's Cartel War. This is maybe. What it's called.
Yeah, okay. You remember it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do remember that. And there's been a lot of these guys. There was a guy a couple of years ago, Hipólito Mora. He was a narco defensa. He was in Michoacan, which is Michoacan is a really, you talk about lime and avocados. That's a big problem there as far as that's a really fertile ground, right? And that's where a lot of that stuff goes on. Plus, Michoacan is a place you have to go through to get somewhere else. So that's a pretty big area. He was a guy who would ultimately run for office. He was really popular down there. He was killed last year by cartels. So, yeah, I mean,
was there a point in history where it flipped and it just became totally unmanageable? Was there like a specific event or date or moment?
I think what I always look to is, kind of what we talked about at the beginning of the show, when Osiel Cardenas recognized that I don't want just farmers or gangsters in the street. I want heavily trained military people that are adept in, all sorts of different, counterinsurgency, all these different types of war. These are some of Mexico's most brave and sadistic fighters. These are your Green Beret types. He says they're going to work for me. And I think that's where, to me, this really turned, because when you look at CJNG and Sinaloa, all these kind of groups that do the enforcing and the killing, they're similar. And I think that was the big turn around the turn of the 20th or the 99 to 2000, around that time. That's when this became ratcheted up. And that's where, they're not just, again, they don't just have shotguns. They have high level weapons. They're suited and booted. They look like military. That's when that changed, the early 2000s. I think that was your insular kind of moment.
My mistake. The documentary is called Cartel Land.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yes, Cartel Land, and the guy's name who you're thinking of is Jose Manuel Morales.
It sounds familiar, yeah.
There are hundreds of people like him around. Real quick, a story that I always go back to, and I've done TikToks on this. It's a really popular story. This was around 2013. It was Los Zetas. There was a farmer in Tamaulipas, which is the border state to Texas. Don Alejo, he was called. He had this, 100-acre farm, did livestock, really good guy, was really well known in the community. He made his fortune in lumber. And he was being pressured by the cartel to give up his ranch. In fact, cartel people went to his house and said, look, many times, we're going to get rid of you, old man. You either leave or you're gone, whatever. One Friday comes and he says, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to go to war with these people. He tells all of his staff, you don't have to come in on Friday. And he essentially creates a fortress in his home. He stockpiles it with a bunch of weapons. And he was like a really adept marksman from when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And he went to war with Los Zetas. He ended up killing, I think, 6 or 8 of them. And he ultimately died fighting. But you have these stories of these people that fight back. and they try to, everything they've worked for their whole life, they're not going to give it up to these cartel groups. And it's really a shame because there's so many people that I think just want to live life there. And I'll tell you what, I've said before, it wouldn't surprise me within 10 years, these groups are very populated in this country. They already are. I mean, street gangs are run by cartels now. They're not the Bloods and the Crips and the groups are not. They're run and oversold by cartels. That's where they're getting the drugs from.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a really sad state.
It's just one of those. I wonder this all the time because it's like, we're both colonies of former empires,
Yeah.
and it's like, what was culturally or politically different that allowed us to have at least a semblance to have the respect for the rule of law and a judicial system here that has, it's far from a perfect situation here too, but it's not chaos and it's not murder in the streets without any sort of fear of government, arrests or reprisal or anything like that. Like, it's like we have kind of largely a status quo that is respected and a judicial system that is largely respected, where it's just down there, it's like, man, fuck it. And it's like they have resources, they have fertile lands, they have oil and gas, like and tourism and everything we talked about. Like, they should have enough money where it's like you're always going to have some kind of drug trade, but it shouldn't be the thing that dominates an entire country of millions.
When you look back on the quote, it's very simple. Money is the root of all evil. And at the end of the day, this is a gigantic amount of money. I mean, the global drug trade is tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's, when we think of it like even in our country, right? When you're a prison guard at a correctional facility, you don't make that much money.
Yeah.
And if a criminal comes to you and says, hey, listen, all you got to do is look away when this person comes in and we'll pay you $500 extra a week. It's easy to corrupt people, right? Yeah. Look at these military people. They were working for the military. Yeah. They were distinguished military people. And they said, you know what? I'm going to go work for a crazed psychopath who killed his best friend to take over power. I mean, that's how it starts. Money. It's always about money. And it's gotten worse and worse. Yeah. I mean, I loved how this country tried to roll out this. We got Chapo. It's all over now. And it's like, it's way worse.
Yeah.
And what has it really gotten? Chapo's, in a prison and, his life is nothing now. And there's people that's taking over.
Yeah. And it's like he should be in prison.
Sure.
Right. But it's like, it doesn't even begin to solve any issues.
But what's crazy is in Sinaloa and where he's from, he is looked at as a god.
Yeah.
Because remember, the people that live there, cartels are better than the government.
Yeah.
They've at least done something for them. Mm-hmm. Like Chapo is from a very rural place. He installed roads. He gave them electric, running water. His mother recently died, Chapo's mom. Mm-hmm. I mean, she was like a god in that area. She was they're looked at as really like god-like people. They're not looked at like we look at them. Like mm-hmm. they're not, but then again, like you go to other countries and like, whether it's Islamic terrorists or whatever, they're looked at and there's hero worship for them. So I think what's sick about this country is like, there are people here that worship Chapo Guzman,
mm-hmm.
And it's like,
I guess the thing that I will always struggle with is like, if you're a citizen down there, how do you balance the, like, hey, the roads and running water and all that is great, and electricity. How do you balance that with indiscriminately killing 90 people? Like, that to me is like, well, now like I can't. Who knows if we're going to be able to drive on that road tomorrow because they might just shoot me for no reason.
But I think about it's like I related to this country with the mafia. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a lot of killing in Chicago, during the days of Al Capone. But the people that were poor and needed food, they knew I was going to, give them donuts or a meal, mm-hmm. In the morning, and they just didn't care. It's you got to do what you got to do, and I'm not going to worry about where the money comes from.
Yeah. But I guess I feel like you could be you could be a pipe fitter, an iron worker, or something like that in Chicago, and never really have to touch. Like, you could avoid that criminal life if you wanted to. It feels the way you're talking, avocados, limes, gas, every single industry is impacted and touched on some level by crime. And that, at least
here's the difference, and I'll end on this. This is the difference between, you're right, Chief, in Mexico to here.
Mm-hmm.
We have done a nice job in this country of stamping out organized crime, okay, by creating things like the RICO Act. You know, the mafia has been decimated by the RICO Act.
Yeah.
It wasn't because of John Gotti or Al Capone. It was an insular act. And you look at today, we use the RICO Act like candy. I mean, if you are someone, so like, let's say Eddie, and you decide to commit a crime, and he tells you to go rob something, and then you tell someone else, hey, you're under me, go rob this person. They'll give him RICO now. They'll say he's the guy at the top, and he's instructing you folks to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
They gave a president the RICO Act now. So that's their tool.
Yeah.
Some of these countries don't have that statute. So we've done a nice job at stamping it out. They've decided, though, in Mexico, we're going to just turn a blind eye. As long as we get paid, we don't give a shit what happens. And that's administration after administration. And we here don't care because it also funds a lot of things we do.
And fuck them.
Yeah. You think the Mexico president is making more from his salary or from the cartel?
Well, totally, but it's like, it seems like it's negatively impact. Like, that to me, when I look at some of these countries, and Mexico is a great example, they should be a wealthy kind of first world country where they have everything, because they have, like, you know, America, like, this is like, you know, land of fruit and honey. The streets are paved with gold, but it's like, we had lumber, we have oil, we have farmland, like, we have like all these great things that we just were born here with. And Mexico has a lot of those things too. And it seems like they were unable to create a society. And if you look at like 100 years ago, you know, early 1900s Mexico, like post the Mexican-American War, they were always like assassinating the president, and that was, you know, everybody just kind of warring, trying to get control. And they never had like this established, they never had like their founding fathers, their constitution, where it's like, this is the foundation of our country. And it's like, but that was like before the drug trade. So it's like, they almost, like, the drug trade like walked into a vacuum of instability and made things worse, but they benefited themselves. But
what's interesting too is that the president down there completely band-aids everything, right? So he'll say, well, homicides are down, but he doesn't tell people that missing people is going up precipitously. Yeah. Right. So like, he kind of just band-aids over things, like, oh, well, you know, and this country does it too, but
totally.
So far this year, 40 politicians have been killed in Mexico in 5.5 months.
That's insane.
You know, police are killed at an extreme rate. And what's crazy about Mexican police is when you get off duty, you're not allowed to possess a weapon.
Oh, so you can't even defend yourself if someone,
No. And if an armed group, and when you're a cop, like if you're a cop in Chicago, I would think you have to live within a certain area, right? Same in Mexico. If you're a police officer in some little town, you live there. You're not hard to find.
Yeah.
You know, it's just unfair. It's not even fair. Yeah. There's no protection. Journalists are killed like crazy. It's every facet of the community, as you alluded to, is affected by it. And I don't know where you go. I don't know how you even start to fix it, because the appetite for drugs will always be there. And that's the real issue. Countries like this that just have this huge appetite for narcotics. Remember Europe too. Yep. Remember, you know, all these places. So it's a shame. It's a sad state. But yeah, Los Zetas is the group, I think, that really engineer the shock and awe. And they put it into our doorstep. Like, we would never have known. We don't know about this stuff a lot of the time. We know about it because of these videos you see, right? Yeah. You put these videos out where you see these people, you know, knelt down and big people, guns behind them. You know, these are the people that started that. So I think that's what revolutionized it.
Bad.
All
right, Jeff. Thanks as always. It was great to finally chop it up again, dude.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll see you here soon.
I might be. Look, you might look out for me real soon. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask too. Obviously, we're talking cartels, factions, gangs, whatever. I got to ask, do you think that the Nadu Crew is properly armed to handle the Ryders?
Yeah, you might be one of these police officers.
Well, I'll tell you right now. I mean, we're pretty formidable at this point. I mean, we have. I mean, I put a tweet out last night about kind of folks checking in. You know, where is the crew at? I mean, we got all sorts of folks. I think last check, you know, I don't know what the numbers were, but I think we're pretty formidable. Just know this: we won't get down into the shock and awe stuff that some of those rider lowlifes do. We don't, you know.
How do you protect against double agents?
Well, that's one problem I have, because there's a guy called Sully Soprano who I know is a major rider. All of a sudden, he's been popping up in my mentions. So listen, my experience in covering criminal groups has prepared me. The thing that Rico Bosco will never understand, and this is the last thing I'll say, I'm significantly more intelligent than he is. I'm one step ahead always, and my covering of crime groups has prepared me for that. Remember, guys, I deal with the mafia on a daily basis. Rico Bosco ain't a big deal.
If Rico was born in Mexico, what kind of life do you think he would be living?
He would be.
Is he eating asses and tamales?
Oh no, absolutely.
Okay.
He's a they call him halcones. A halcone is like a lookout, a real low level guy. He's very expendable.
Okay.
I disavow all this.
Yeah. He ain't doing nothing crazy.
Okay. Yeah, I don't agree with that either. But
what do you think? You think he'd be eating people?
I think Rico's got, like you were talking about, these sadistic people. I think Rico, you know, he's got a little bit of a screw loose. He's a little bit paranoid. I don't know if you've noticed that. Yeah, you just never know. Thank God.
Similarities to Osiel Cardenas in the thought of he wants to establish these really powerful, like, warriors around him to, like, kind of protect him.
Mm-hmm.
But when the rubber meets the road, he orders his pals to go attack people's wives, not him. So I could see that.
Rico,
we should do that. We should compare Barstool people to cartel bosses.
It'd be a hell of a blog if you come back.
Well, there's my first idea.
Yeah.
What kind of job is this?
It is something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, good luck. Rico's my guy. Obviously, we're friendly too, Jeff. So good luck. I'll be watching from the bleachers.
Yep.
Thanks, guys. Hey, by the way, Eddie, you're looking skinnier. You losing weight?
Dropped a little bit. We've dropped a little bit since the new year. Yeah.
I could see. I saw a video of you yesterday. You looked a little bit more svelte.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jeff. And to sit down, obviously, you're still everything is still cooking.
Yeah, we're rolling. You know, I got into an argument with Sammy the Bull recently. That was fun, and you know, he ordered me to come down and get on my knees in front of him. So we'll see what happens there. And yeah, we're having fun.
All right.
All right, great.
Go listen to that. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
All right. That's it, everybody. Thanks for listening. We will be airing a best of episode on Monday for the draft, obviously, because it's Memorial Day. So I hope everyone has a great holiday weekend, and we'll pick it back up Wednesday and Thursday next week. See ya.